Single dad saved stranded woman in rain before a blind date, not knowing she was his date's sister. Before we continue, tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Nathan Cross was standing in his auto shop staring at his phone like it personally offended him. And honestly, the text on the screen might as well have been a death sentence because his sister Rachel had sent him 7 messages in the last hour reminding him about tonight's blind date, and each one was more threatening than the last. The final message said, "If you bail, I'm telling Chloe you broke a promise and you know how she gets." And Nathan knew exactly how his 8-year-old daughter got, because she had mastered the disappointed puppy eyes that could make a grown man crumble in about 3 seconds flat. He hadn't been on a date in 3 years, not since Elena destroyed everything they'd built together when he walked into his own bedroom at a family barbecue and found her wrapped around his cousin Marcus, like they weren't standing in the house Nathan had renovated with his bare hands. The divorce was brutal and public, and everyone in their small town had an opinion about it, and Nathan had decided somewhere along the way that trusting someone with his heart again just wasn't worth the risk of ending up back in that dark place where he couldn't get out of bed and Chloe had to make her own cereal in the mornings. But Rachel wouldn't let it go, kept saying things like, "Chloe needs to see you happy," and "You can't hide forever," and the worst one, "Elena doesn't get to win by making you afraid to live." And that last one hit different because maybe his sister had a point, even if Nathan would never admit it out loud. So here he was, closing up the shop early on a Thursday, about to drive across town to meet some woman named Megan, who worked in marketing and liked hiking, and had a nice smile according to Rachel's extremely detailed sales pitch. Chloe was at Rachel's house waiting for him to pick her up after the date, and when he dropped her off earlier, she had grabbed his face with both hands and said, "Daddy, you have to be nice to the lady, because what if she's the one who makes us a family again?" And Nathan's heart had cracked right down the middle because his little girl still believed in fairy tales, even after watching her parents' marriage explode in spectacular fashion. 20 minutes later, the sky opened up like someone had turned on a fire hose, and Nathan was navigating the roads near the airport, cursing himself for taking this shortcut because visibility was garbage, and he was already running late, and Megan was probably sitting at that restaurant wondering if she'd been stood up by some loser mechanic who couldn't even show up on time. That's when he saw something that made him ease off the gas and squint through the windshield, a figure on the side of the road near the airport exit. And as he got closer, he realized it was a woman struggling with a suitcase in the absolute worst conditions imaginable. Everything in him said keep driving because he was late, and this wasn't his problem, and getting involved with strangers never ended well. But then he thought about Chloe saying, "Be nice to the lady," and he thought about the kind of man he wanted to be versus the man Elena had turned him into. And before he could talk himself out of it, he was pulling over and grabbing the umbrella from his back seat and jogging toward this stranger who looked like she was having the worst day of her entire life. She was soaked completely through, blonde hair plastered to her face and mascara running down her cheeks and shivering so hard he could see it from 10 feet away. And when she looked up at him, her eyes were this deep green color that hit him somewhere in the chest he wasn't expecting. She was crying and trying to hide it and failing miserably. And Nathan held the umbrella over both of them, even though he was already getting drenched because his jacket wasn't exactly waterproof. "Ma'am, you're going to catch pneumonia out here. What happened?" His voice came out gentler than he meant it to, the same voice he used when Chloe had nightmares. And the woman just shook her head like she couldn't even form words. Her suitcase had a broken wheel, and her phone was dead, and she was standing in a monsoon outside a closed rideshare pickup zone, looking like the universe had personally decided to ruin her Thursday. Nathan didn't wait for her to answer, just grabbed her suitcase with one hand and kept the umbrella over her with the other and said, "My truck's right there. Let's get you dried off and figure this out." And maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe she just didn't have any fight left in her. But she followed him without arguing, and that told him everything he needed to know about how bad her day had been. He got her settled in the passenger seat with the heat blasting and wrapped Chloe's soccer blanket around her shoulders and handed her the coffee thermos he'd filled that morning, and she held on to it with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the planet. Her name was Olivia, and she'd just flown in to visit her sister, and her ride had canceled, and her phone had died, and her suitcase had betrayed her. And somewhere in the middle of explaining all this, she started laughing. That kind of broken laughter that happens when everything goes wrong at once, and you either laugh or completely fall apart. Nathan found himself laughing too because the whole situation was absurd. This random encounter in a rainstorm with a stranger who had the kind of smile that made him forget he was 25 minutes late for a date he didn't want to go on anyway. They talked while the rain pounded against the windshield, and she mentioned she was visiting because she needed to get away from her life for a while, and he didn't push for details because he recognized that particular brand of pain in her voice, the kind that came from having someone you trusted tear your world apart. She asked where he was headed, and he admitted he was late for a blind date, and she laughed again and said her sister had a blind date tonight too, and they both agreed the universe had a weird sense of humor. He drove her to her sister's apartment building, and when she got out, she turned back to look at him with those green eyes and said, "Thank you. Really, you didn't have to do any of this." And he said, "My daughter would have been disappointed if I drove past someone who needed help." And Olivia smiled like he'd given her something precious instead of just a ride and a thermos of mediocre coffee. He watched her walk into the building with her broken suitcase and felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't felt in 3 years. Something that scared him and excited him and made him want to turn around and ask for her number, except he was already impossibly late for a date with another woman, and that would make him exactly the kind of guy he'd sworn he'd never become. Nathan arrived at Rosewood Cafe looking like a disaster, slightly damp and definitely flustered, and the hostess Dot gave him a knowing smile because she'd known him since he was 16, and she probably had opinions about everything happening in his life. His date was sitting at a corner table, looking elegant and put together, and absolutely nothing like the woman he'd just left, standing in a lobby with a broken suitcase and borrowed coffee warmth still on her hands. Megan was nice and smart and accomplished, and Nathan tried really hard to focus on what she was saying about her marketing career and her hiking hobby and her nice smile that Rachel had mentioned, but his mind kept drifting back to green eyes and broken laughter, and the way Olivia had looked at him like he was something good in a day full of terrible things. He was asking Megan about her family when the restaurant door opened and his heart stopped beating entirely because walking toward their table was the woman from the rain, changed into dry clothes but unmistakably her, and she was waving at Megan like she knew her. "Liv, you made it. How was your flight?" Megan stood up to hug her, and Nathan felt like the floor was dissolving beneath his feet because this wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening, except it absolutely was happening right in front of his face. Olivia was explaining about her canceled ride in the rain and some amazing stranger who helped her, and then she turned to acknowledge Nathan and their eyes met, and he watched the exact moment recognition hit her like a truck. "You're Nathan? You're Megan's blind date?" Olivia's voice came out strangled, and Nathan could only nod because words had completely abandoned him. Megan looked between them with growing confusion and asked if they knew each other, and Olivia forced out a laugh that sounded nothing like the genuine ones from the truck and said, "He's the guy who rescued me from the rain. Small world, right?" And Nathan said, "Right, small world." Except neither of them were smiling anymore because this wasn't a small world. This was a cosmic joke. And the punchline was that he'd just spent 30 minutes falling for his blind date's sister. Megan insisted Olivia join them for dinner because that's what sisters do apparently. And Nathan found himself trapped in the most uncomfortable meal of his entire existence, sitting across from one woman while stealing glances at another and feeling like the absolute worst human being on the planet. The conversation flowed mostly from Megan's direction, talking about her job and her accomplishments and her 5-year plan. And Nathan nodded in all the right places, while his brain kept short-circuiting every time Olivia accidentally made eye contact with him across the table. They both reached for the bread basket at the same moment, and their fingers brushed, and Nathan pulled back like he'd touched a hot stove. And Megan noticed because, of course she noticed, her eyes narrowing just slightly before she launched into another story about a marketing campaign she'd crushed last quarter. Olivia was quiet the whole meal, pushing food around her plate and excusing herself to the bathroom twice. And when she finally said she was exhausted from traveling and needed to head home, Nathan felt equal parts relieved and devastated because watching her walk away felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. The date ended with Megan saying she'd had a lovely time and Nathan saying he'd call her, and both of them knowing something was off, even if neither wanted to acknowledge what that something actually was. Nathan drove home replaying every moment in his head, the way Olivia's laugh had sounded in his truck versus the forced politeness at dinner, the way she'd looked at him on that rainy curb like he was her rescue and then looked at him across the table like he was her punishment. And he pulled into his driveway, feeling more confused than he'd been since Elena packed her bags and left without a single explanation that made any sense. Rachel was waiting with questions and Chloe was waiting with hope, and Nathan disappointed both of them by saying she was nice and heading straight to bed because he couldn't process what had just happened, let alone explain it to the two people who wanted him to find happiness more than anything in the world. He dreamed about green eyes and rainstorms and woke up feeling like he'd made a terrible mistake, except he had no idea what the right choice would have looked like in the first place. A week passed, and then two and Nathan went on a second date with Megan, because that's what you do when you're trying to be a functioning adult. Coffee this time during the day where things felt lighter and less intense, and maybe this could work if he just gave it a chance. Megan mentioned her sister was bored at the apartment all day while she worked, and before Nathan could stop himself, he was offering to show Olivia around town because he lived here his whole life and knew all the best spots, and what kind of neighbor would he be if he didn't help out a visitor. The words hung in the air between them, and Megan's expression flickered through something Nathan couldn't read before settling on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and saying, "That's so sweet of you, I'll tell her." And Nathan immediately wanted to take the offer back, except he also desperately didn't want to take it back, and that contradiction was going to drive him absolutely insane. Olivia texted him 2 days later, just a simple message saying Megan mentioned the tour offer, and was he sure it wasn't weird? And Nathan typed back that it was totally fine and completely casual and just being friendly, lying through his teeth with every single keystroke. They met downtown on a Tuesday afternoon, and within 5 minutes it felt exactly like the truck again. Easy conversation and genuine laughter, and that terrifying sense that he'd known this woman his whole life instead of just a handful of hours scattered across an impossible situation. He showed her his favorite bookstore, where the owner's cat slept on the mystery section, and the diner where Chloe always ordered chocolate chip pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, and the park bench where he'd sat after signing his divorce papers, trying to figure out how his life had gone so completely sideways. Olivia told him about her broken engagement, how her fiancé Derek had called off the wedding 2 weeks before the ceremony, saying she was too ambitious and too independent and would never be the kind of wife he actually wanted. And Nathan felt his hands clench into fists because what kind of man was threatened by a woman who had goals and dreams of her own? They sat on that park bench together closer than they should have been, and she asked how he'd learned to trust anyone after what Elena did. And he looked at her and said, "I haven't, not until," and then stopped himself because finishing that sentence would mean admitting something neither of them were ready to face. His phone buzzed with a text from Megan checking in, and reality crashed back around them like cold water, and Olivia stood up saying she should probably get back, and Nathan drove her home in silence that said everything their words couldn't. Saturday morning, Chloe asked if Olivia could come over for pancakes because, "Daddy, you said she was nice and I want to meet her." And Nathan made the mistake of mentioning it to Megan, who mentioned it to Olivia, who showed up at his door looking nervous and beautiful and holding a book about art techniques for kids that she'd grabbed at the bookstore they'd visited together. Chloe fell in love immediately the way children do when they recognize a kindred spirit, dragging Olivia through the house, showing her every drawing and stuffed animal, and asking a million questions about colors and design because apparently Olivia was a graphic designer, and apparently she knew exactly how to talk to an 8-year-old about creativity without being condescending. Nathan watched them from the kitchen doorway, with pancake batter on his hands, and his heart doing things it had no business doing. And when Chloe crawled into Olivia's lap to show her a particularly complicated princess sketch, he felt the walls he'd built after Elena start to crack in ways he wasn't sure he could repair. Olivia fit here in his messy little life, with his precocious daughter and his too small kitchen and his scarred heart. She fit in a way Megan never had and probably never would. And that realization terrified him more than anything had in years. Megan showed up unannounced at the shop the following week and found Olivia's jacket draped over a chair, because she'd stopped by to bring Chloe a coloring book and left it behind. And the look on Megan's face told Nathan the conversation he'd been dreading had finally arrived. She asked him directly if he had feelings for her sister, and Nathan couldn't lie because he wasn't that kind of man, even when the truth was going to hurt. So he said, "I think there might be something there, and I didn't plan it, and I'm sorry." And watched Megan's expression crumble before she rebuilt it into something cold and distant and walked out without another word. The confrontation between sisters happened that night at Megan's apartment, and Olivia called Nathan afterward with a shaking voice telling him she was leaving in the morning, going back to Seattle where she belonged, where she couldn't keep hurting her sister by existing in the same space as him. Megan had said things that cut deep, accusations about Olivia always taking everything Megan wanted, old wounds from childhood ripped open fresh, and Olivia couldn't bear being the villain in her sister's story, even if that meant walking away from something that felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years. Nathan tried to argue, tried to say they could figure it out together, but Olivia was already crying and saying goodbye and promising it was better this way. And then the line went dead, and Nathan stood in his kitchen holding a silent phone, feeling like he'd just watched something precious slip through his fingers. He drove to Megan's apartment complex and sat in his truck, staring at the building, willing Olivia to appear. But the windows stayed dark and the rain started falling again, like the universe was mocking him. And eventually he drove home with an empty passenger seat where she should have been. Chloe found him the next morning sitting on the porch looking wrecked, and she climbed into his lap even though she was getting too big for it and said, "She's gone, isn't she?" And Nathan could only nod because if he tried to speak, he was going to fall apart completely. His 8-year-old daughter held his face in her small hands and said, "Then go get her daddy. That's what they do in the movies when they love somebody." And Nathan wanted to explain that real life wasn't movies, and sometimes people just leave and you have to let them go. Except the words wouldn't come because maybe, just maybe, his daughter was smarter than he was giving her credit for. 2 weeks crawled by like molasses in winter, and Nathan went through every single day feeling like someone had carved out a piece of his chest and forgotten to put it back. He showed up at the shop and fixed engines and smiled at customers and picked Chloe up from school and made dinner and read bedtime stories, doing all the things a good father was supposed to do while feeling absolutely nothing except this hollow ache that wouldn't go away, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it. Rachel kept giving him looks across the dinner table, and Chloe kept asking when Olivia was coming back, and Nathan kept saying, "She's not, sweetheart," until his daughter stopped asking altogether, which somehow hurt even worse than the questions. Olivia wasn't doing any better 3,000 miles away in Seattle, sitting in her apartment that used to feel like home, but now felt like a waiting room for a life she didn't want anymore. She threw herself into work designing logos and websites for clients who didn't care about her broken heart, and her best friend Maya showed up every few days with takeout and wine and brutal honesty that Olivia wasn't ready to hear. Maya kept saying things like, "You found a man who stops in rainstorms and makes pancakes for his kid, and you just left him there." And Olivia kept saying, "She's my sister." Like that explained everything, when really it explained nothing at all. Megan sat in her office 3 states away, staring at spreadsheets she couldn't focus on, because her coworker Janet had said something that wouldn't stop echoing in her head. The question of whether she actually wanted Nathan or just wanted to win for once in her life. The honest answer was uncomfortable and ugly, and forced Megan to look at parts of herself she'd been avoiding for years. The jealousy she'd carried since childhood, watching Olivia light up every room while Megan did everything right and still felt invisible. Nathan had never been hers to lose because his heart had chosen Olivia in that rainstorm before he even knew her name. And punishing her sister for being lovable wasn't going to make Megan any less lonely. She picked up her phone and put it down about 17 times before finally hitting the call button. And when Olivia answered, sounding exhausted and sad, Megan said the 2 words she should have said weeks ago instead of all the hurtful things she'd thrown like weapons. She said, "I'm sorry," and meant it with everything she had, apologizing for blaming Olivia for something that wasn't her fault and for letting old wounds poison something that could have been beautiful, and for being so wrapped up in her own pain that she couldn't see her sister was hurting too. Olivia cried and Megan cried, and they talked for 2 hours about things they'd never said out loud. about childhood competitions neither of them had asked for, and parents who compared them constantly, and boys who looked at Olivia first, even when they ended up with Megan. By the end of the conversation, something had shifted between them, not fixed completely because healing takes time, but cracked open in a way that let light through for the first time in years. Megan told Olivia to go back, and Olivia said she couldn't, and Megan said, "I'm giving you my blessing, you idiot. Now stop being stubborn and go get your man." And Olivia laughed through her tears because her sister had never sounded more like herself. Meanwhile, back in Nathan's living room, a very determined 8-year-old was hatching a plan because grown-ups were useless when it came to love, and someone had to take charge of this situation. Chloe recruited Rachel to help her use the computer, claiming she needed it for a school project, and then casually mentioned she was actually trying to find Olivia's address because Daddy won't do it, so I have to. And Rachel's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. The whole story came tumbling out in that breathless way kids talk when they're passionate about something. Daddy met Olivia in the rain, and he likes her. Likes her. But she went away because of her sister, and now he's sad all the time. And it's not fair because Olivia made him smile. Real smiles, not pretend ones. Rachel confronted Nathan at the shop that afternoon, armed with information from her tiny co-conspirator and a determination to knock some sense into her brother's thick skull. She told him Chloe was literally searching the internet trying to find this woman because her father was too scared to do it himself. And Nathan tried to say it was complicated, and Rachel cut him off, saying Chloe predicted he'd say exactly that. She reminded him how he'd shut down after Elena, going through motions instead of actually living, and said she hadn't seen him light up the way he did talking about Olivia since before the divorce destroyed him. Nathan argued that Olivia had made her choice, and Rachel said running away because you feel guilty isn't the same as not wanting someone, and maybe Olivia was waiting for him to fight for her, instead of letting her go without a word. The conversation ended with Rachel saying he could either spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been, or he could get in his truck and go find out. And Nathan stood in his empty shop after she left, thinking about rainstorms and green eyes, and the way Olivia had looked holding his daughter like she belonged there. He made his decision at 3 a.m, called Rachel to come stay with Chloe, threw a bag in his truck, and started driving towards Seattle because flying felt too slow, and he needed the hours on the road to figure out what he was going to say when he got there. What Nathan didn't know was that Olivia had made her own decision right around the same time, booking a flight back to his town because Megan's blessing had unlocked something in her chest, and she was done running from the one person who'd made her feel found instead of lost. They crossed paths somewhere over the Midwest, her plane flying east while his truck headed west, and the universe was apparently having the time of its life watching these two idiots chase each other in opposite directions. Olivia landed and went straight to his shop, but he wasn't there. Went to his house, but he wasn't there either. And Rachel opened the door, looking like Christmas had come early, saying, "Oh, honey, this is perfect. He's in Seattle looking for you right now." And Olivia's face went through about 15 emotions in 3 seconds flat. Chloe came barreling out from behind Rachel, screaming Olivia's name and launching herself into a hug that nearly knocked them both over. And Rachel called Nathan immediately to deliver the news that he was an idiot, and the woman he was chasing was standing in his living room. Nathan pulled over on some random highway and started laughing, the kind of laugh that comes from pure relief and total disbelief. And when Rachel put Olivia on the phone, neither of them could stop smiling, even though they couldn't see each other's faces. He said, "You came back," and she said, "You came looking for me." And Chloe yelled in the background, "Tell him to come home, I want pancakes." And they were both crying and laughing at the same time because this whole situation was ridiculous and perfect, and exactly how their story was supposed to go. Nathan turned his truck around and drove straight through the night. And when he finally pulled into his driveway, 16 hours later, Olivia was sitting on the porch wrapped in Chloe's soccer blanket, waiting for him like she'd been waiting her whole life. He walked toward her slowly because part of him still couldn't believe she was real. And she stood up, and they just looked at each other for a long moment before he said, "I'm not letting you run again." And she said, "I'm done running." And then he kissed her right there on his front porch, with the sunrise painting everything gold, and his daughter cheering from the window until Rachel pulled her away to give them privacy. 1 year later, they stood in Rosewood Cafe surrounded by everyone who loved them. Olivia in white and Nathan in a suit he'd bought specifically for this moment, and Chloe bouncing between them, refusing to choose sides because she wanted to stand with both of her parents. Megan was there too, maid of honor despite everything, having flown in the night before with a new boyfriend who looked at her the way Nathan looked at Olivia, like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. The vows were simple and real and made everyone cry, including Dot, who'd been running this cafe for 40 years and swore she'd never seen a love story quite like this one. Nathan promised to always pull over and always stop and always choose her in rain and shine and everything in between. And Olivia promised to never run again because he and Chloe were her home now, and she was done searching for something she'd already found. Sometimes the detours become the destination, and sometimes the stranger you rescue becomes the person who saves you right back. Nathan pulled over on a rainy night, expecting nothing, and found everything he didn't know he was missing. Olivia got stranded, expecting the worst day of her life, and found the beginning of her best chapter. And Megan learned that love isn't a competition, and her sister's happiness didn't take anything away from her own. If this story reminded you that love shows up in unexpected places and that the right person is worth every risk and every mile, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because next time it's raining and you see someone stranded on the side of the road, maybe pull over. You never know who you might find.